Good evening and welcome to OTF Connects. My name is Susan Watt and I'll be moderating this session tonight. So I'm in the background, but our presenter tonight is Jen Kranenberg, who's from Lambton, Kent, which is down the southwest part of our province. Beautiful southwest, balmy weather some of the time anyway. I don't know what it's like there now. She's in Chatham. And Jen and I just met tonight. She's a fairly new, she's done one other OTF Connect session on a similar topic. And that was just a couple of weeks ago, I think, wasn't it, Jen? And this is a part 2. So we're really happy to have you here. And I'm going to turn things over to you right now, Jen.
Excellent, thank you. So welcome everybody, and thank you, Susan, for that introduction. This is my second OTF session. I had a part 1 to the problem-based learning about a month ago, and I'm super excited to be back tonight and sharing a little bit more this evening. So thank you to everybody that has joined us tonight, and I think Susan said it very well when she mentioned that because we have a small group, let's approach this more like a conversation. So if you do have any questions or comments as I'm going along, please don't hesitate to hit the talk button and chime in or raise your hand or put that in the chat box and we'll address that. So for tonight, our goals, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just reviewing some of the key elements from the session, the first session, so part 1. And then we're going to take a look at cross-curricular connections in problem-based learning and assessment. And we're going to do that through some examples that I have from a project that I completed with a grade 2-3 class. And we're also going to engage in some hands-on activities through this platform and through Google Docs. So if you were part of session 1, if you could just maybe check in with the check mark. So I know we already did that a little while ago just to see who had been part of an OTF session, but this will just give us an idea of who had been with us for session 1. Okay, so it looks like we have about 5 people. And that session is available on the OTF website, so if you do want to go back and take a look at that and some of the things that we're referencing throughout the night, then that's available to you. I also want to mention that my email address is here and my Twitter, and please feel free to reach out and connect with me after the webinar if you have any questions or comments, or if you engage in a problem-based learning activity that's been successful. I'd love to hear about it, or if you have challenges. So I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you after the webinar as well. So moving on, if you could just use that smiley face from the clip art option or the check mark and check in with what you teach currently. So if you're primary, junior, intermediate, or perhaps your role is as a resource teacher or you're a student teacher, just to give us an idea of where we're all at this evening. Okay, so lots of primary. Awesome. So it looks like we have a range, which is fantastic. We have grade 3 French immersion, an innovation instructional coach. Awesome, Sarah, and I'd love to hear more about that position. Occasional teacher, awesome. Great. Primary grade 1-2. So we have a whole range here. And that's the great thing about problem-based learning is it can apply whether you're teaching a kindergarten class or you're in secondary. Oh, and thank you, Susan's put the link there to the first webinar as well. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes reviewing the main topics that we covered in session 1. And to start, what is problem-based learning? So we talked quite a bit about this during the first session, and I'm just going to summarize here that problem-based learning really is a messy, engaging, exciting way to approach learning. So it's engaging those students in problem solving as we seek to find solutions that are relevant to their own lives. And in this picture here, this was a group of students that I had that really wanted to know what they could do to make fresh produce more accessible to their families. And as part of that project, they looked at starting gardens. Problem-based learning is also very flexible. So while you are going to be deliberate in your planning and know the curriculum expectations that you want to cover, you should be comfortable with the fact that there will be some unknown components that come up, and we will explore some of those tonight, and you'll get a better sense of what I mean there. But being open to following student voice and to embracing the learning opportunities that come up unexpectedly, those really are the best pieces of problem-based learning for me. Then we look at why problem-based learning. So what is the purpose? And really it's just that, or not just, but it is that we want to provide our students with an opportunity to develop those 21st century skills. So looking at collaboration, looking at innovation, citizenship, all of those things that we cannot teach in isolation. How do we create rich problems, rich projects and tasks that our students are able to engage in and develop all of those skills? Developing a question. So we spent quite a bit of time last session talking about how to develop a question, and this really is the trickiest part for me. If you don't have a good question, it's really hard to dig in deep, and you want to make sure that when you're developing a question, it cannot be answered with a Google search. So if you're not sure, is this a good problem or not, throw it into Google, see what comes up, and if you come up with a clear-cut answer, then it's really not a good problem-based learning question. You want your question to allow for multiple solutions. You want it to allow for a little bit of room for struggle for your students. And you want to put your students into the question. So what I mean by that is when you're phrasing it, if you say, how can we, or how does this impact us, that making it personal really, it allows for that solution that they develop to be more meaningful to the students. And in my experience, they just become much more engaged in the process. So here we have just a little bit of review around what an action plan can look like. So for the question, how can we help our community? And this is actually the example we will be looking at tonight. It was a grade 2-3 class that I had. They wanted to know how could they help their community, and their potential solution was to help the local food bank. And so they developed some action plans around that, what it was going to look like. And when you're developing your action plan with your students, you want to have 2 or 3 steps that you can follow through. I find 3 maybe is the maximum that you want to plan for initially, because often another idea will come up authentically throughout the project. When you're setting your action plan, you want to make sure that the ideas that the students are generating and that you're planning to carry out are realistic, they're achievable, and that they're linked to your curriculum, so that you can ensure that the work you're doing is purposeful in terms of covering your curriculum expectations. So once you've done all that, when we ended the last session, we were talking about assigning roles. So you've developed your problem, you have your action plan, you're getting ready to go on this project. Your next job is to think about what jobs exist within the project for your students. So, for example, do you need to have a public relations team? And you can see in these images here, I had a group of students that put together a presentation for the United Way, and they went and they spoke to the team and they asked for a grant. So I was not able to take the entire class, but I could take the public relations team. We also had a social media crew, and we had photographers, and we had a secretary, tech support. So in the top picture that you're looking at, there was a group of 4 students that were responsible for putting the presentation up on the projector and advancing the slides and taking care of the sound and all of those things. So as a group, we talk about what roles will need to be completed. And then the next piece that we do is actually a lot of fun because I create application forms, and that looks different depending on whether I've had a grade 2 class or a grade 6 class. But the students have an application form that they have to fill out for that job. And then I hold interviews. So the students have an opportunity to kind of think about that persuasive writing and how are they going to convince me that they deserve that job? What keywords are they going to use? When they're holding their interview, what skills will they need to demonstrate to convince me that they are the best person suited for that job? I think I'll mention quickly as well that when we are creating roles or jobs within the classroom, I always try and create a job that actually exists. So I will give you the very first example, and this was not related to a problem-based learning task, but when I first introduced jobs in the classroom, rather than calling a student the line leader, they were called the tour guide. And their responsibility was to navigate throughout the school, whether we had the entire class or we had a guest. So thinking about a real life job that they could apply for and the skills that they would need for that. I also include on the application form things like, have you ever been fired from a job, which is usually pretty funny when a student chimes in with, yes, you know, my mom fired me from my chores because my room wasn't clean. And then looking even at things like, do they know their address? Do they know their phone number? Do they know their birth date? And having their signature on there. So in the comment section right now, I'd actually love it if you could chime in, and just from the conversation that I've had about the application process and interviewing for jobs, what types of curriculum connections could you see existing just within the task of setting up jobs? So if you have any ideas, just go ahead and chime in. Sorry, Caitlin. Thinking about the process of students filling out application forms for the jobs that we create in the classroom, and then me holding one-on-one interviews, what type of curriculum connections could you make? So I see persuasive writing, definitely Sarah. There's lots of persuasive writing. Oral communication for sure. That's always a great one. Media literacy. Reading and writing. You're welcome. Awesome. I'm just going to advance here, and you'll see on this slide here what I've actually done is I've taken an excerpt from the beginning of the primary, junior, and intermediate language document from K to 8, and in each of these sections, it talks about the importance for students to practice speaking and writing. It talks about the importance of when we look in the second here, and I'm just going to grab my pointer. Bear with me for a second here. Maybe I'm not going to grab the pointer. When we look down at the second section where it says modeled, shared, and guided learning experience, it actually talks about persuasive letters. Now, an application form isn't a letter, but it really is the basis for a letter. So it gives students an opportunity to think about keywords and to think about persuasive language. So for me, there are so many elements of the language document that are covered throughout that process that it really sets me up when I do get to my persuasive writing, and as well the oral communication piece, definitely. So before I go on and talk about digging in and making curriculum connections, I think I've reviewed everything that we've done from the first session, and I just want to check in and see if anybody has any questions or wants any clarification on any of those topics before we move forward. Okay, I don't see any chat bubbles, so I think we're okay. Great. So on this slide, we're going to start with a video in just a moment. Susan will be adding the link to that in the chat section. This video is going to kind of set the stage for the beginning of the project that I was referencing. So it was, how can we help our community, and specifically looking at how the students could help the local food bank. And I will just start by letting you know as well that in this video, there are two students that joined me. So it's myself in the video that you will be seeing, and we were sharing this project at a local TEDx. The two students, their voices are a little bit quiet, so you might have to adjust the volume. I do apologize for that. It's just the way that it was recorded and came across. So what I'm going to ask you to do is follow the bit.ly, watch the video, and when you come back, if you could just click the check mark to let us know that you're back in the room. I think this will only take us about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we can move on together. Okay, it looks like we're just about all back. I just want to give it a couple more seconds here for Amanda. Awesome, great. So thinking about the bulking activity that they talked about at the end of the video, what number sense connections can we make from that? So thinking about an in-the-moment activity. And what I've done is I've added another bit.ly here. Oh, Amanda, that's quite fine, no worries. And Susan will add that into the chat box. And when you follow that document, there you will find the number sense grade 2 and 3, or I think I may have only put grade 3 in there, number sense curriculum. And if you can just kind of browse through there and use the comment button within that Google Doc to identify what curriculum connections you can make with that activity with the students. So I'll just rephrase again that bulking means they would go into the food bank kitchen and they would pick up, say, a box of tea bags, and then they would have to put that into smaller portions. So figuring out, you know, if they had a box of 50 and they had 10 bags, how many tea bags would go into each of those Ziploc bags. And if you do have any problem getting into that Google Doc, if you could just let me know in the chat box, that would be great. And otherwise, I'm just going to flip over there and I'll look for your comments and thoughts. And while you're working, I'm just going to say I always get a kick out of the anonymous names that come up within Google. You have anonymous anteater and buffalo. I find that pretty amusing. So skip counting, yes, definitely. There's a lot of skip counting that was happening around that table. Thank you, Melanie. And I'll mention as well that there are 2 pages, so if you haven't gone down, 4 pages. We've got the grade 2 and 3 there. Excellent, James. Relationship of whole to parts. So looking at fractions. There's one in the operational sense category for the grade 2, represent and explain through investigation using concrete materials and drawings. Division as the sharing of quantity equally. So for example, I can share 12 carrot sticks equally among 4 friends by giving each person 3 carrot sticks. So for me, that was a big one that came up. And as I looked through the curriculum when I came back from that activity, from that field trip, and I was looking at the curriculum document, it really struck me as I was going through how many curriculum expectations had come up during that activity and how many opportunities I had to provide authentic conversations and learning for the students in the moment in the most unlikely of places for me. So that wasn't something that I had necessarily anticipated, but we really did stop and we had a math lesson and a problem-solving activity that occurred around the table in the Outreach for Hunger, where the students were able to actually engage in a very rich, meaningful task. So we're going to flip back now over to Blackboard and take another look at the slide here. I think you get the idea just that in the moment you can really look and you can find a lot of curriculum expectations. And it doesn't always have to be exactly where you plan to be in your program. Sometimes those great moments just come up and we can take those teachable moments. Ruth, I see here division problems, real life examples. Sorry, I apologize that you couldn't get into the Google Doc and I just saw your comment here, but yes, definitely a lot of division problems and a lot of opportunities to do that either through repeated subtraction or repeated addition or multiplication. So letting the students kind of come in at their own entry point and work from there. So I think for me, the big thing that really stuck out here when I went through this journey for the first time was that knowing that curriculum, knowing what my students needed to know, allowed me that flexibility, and trusting my own professional judgment really gave me the freedom to follow student voice in the moment. So to be able to stop what we were doing and know, hey, you know what, my guys need to know how to divide equal groups or whatever it is that comes up. Melanie, I agree, multiplication, and yes, definitely. Just as important as the connection between addition, multiplication, and subtraction and division. So when you're exploring problem-based learning and you're in the heart of a problem or a task or an adventure, you might unintentionally cover or uncover curriculum subject expectations that you hadn't planned. And that's where I say that problem-based learning can be messy or it can be unexpected. So being open to that and allowing yourself the opportunity to explore those learning opportunities really is where the magic often happens. And it really captures the student's attention because you are in the moment. So a little tip on the side for myself is I always photocopy or print off the curriculum expectations for my grade. And I've taught many different grades over the years. And I failed to mention that. I apologize. This year I am not in a classroom. I am an elementary math coach for the Lambton-Kent District School Board. So I'm working with a variety of classes. When I was in the classroom, I would take those curriculum expectations and make like a little do-a-tang or binder of those. And as I covered curriculum that I hadn't necessarily anticipated I would cover at the time, I would just flip through and highlight what I had already covered so that I could go back. And for myself, I actually would just put the date down because I used things like Seesaw and Google Drive to document student learning and take videos and photograph and make notes. that allowed me, when I would go back and look for that information, then I knew exactly the date that I was looking for it. So, I mean, that's up to you how you decide to document your own learning journey with your students, but that really, for me, seemed to be the most efficient. Okay, so moving along here, let's take a look. Raising awareness. So in this video that you're going to look at in a moment, if the students are going to continue talking about the project. It may be a little bit louder than the last video, so I just want to give you a little bit of a warning there. You might need to adjust your volume. After you watch the video, there is a link, so Susan's going to put up 2 links. The first one is going to be to the video, which is about 1 minute and 20 seconds long. The second link is to the language document. And when you go to the second link, if you go down to page 63 of the document, if you just scroll down, that is where we will be working from. And just thinking about what types of curriculum connections can you make. So when it came to raising awareness, which was one of the action plans that the students wanted to carry through with, I was very purposeful and intentional in my own planning. So despite all the flexibility I'm talking about, I still had very purposeful moments built into the problem-based learning. So thinking about my language arts and thinking about how I would tie in multiple expectations into this project. So when you go to the second link, if you can take a look there, and then back in the comments section, just talk again about what types of specific expectations are covered through the tasks that the students will be talking about. And Susan is also, poor Susan, she's a busy girl right now, busy lady right now, is going to set a 6-minute timer for us. So I feel like within 6 minutes we should all have the opportunity to watch the video, take a look at that language document, and then come back and chat a little bit about that within the comments section. And if you have any questions, just pop them into the comments as well, or if you're having any troubles, let us know. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of ideas here. Thank you to everybody that chimed in. As you can see, when you're looking through that document, there are so many places where an expectation jumps out and you say, hey, that I can connect to that. I can work on that. So it was a great, oh, there's the timer, excellent, a great opportunity for the students to explore several different curriculum expectations, or for me to cover those with the students through one task. And that was, as I said, very intentional on my end when they came up with this idea, because I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to tie it in to my curriculum. So wanting to help the food bank was great, but I wasn't seeing any extremely strong connections to make. So for me, I decided to link it to our language, and that was why we decided, or I really guided them towards making videos as a way of public awareness. So they often thought that was their own idea, but I set the provocations out for the students. So when you're looking at problem-based learning, one of the big pieces that you really want to explore is how are you going to measure your impact? So it's important for the students and for you to know whether or not they were successful. And because these are often problems, or they should always be problems, where there's not a clear-cut answer, we want to make sure that we are doing something to check if we have been successful. And often a survey is one way to do that, especially when we're talking about social justice issues or things like raising awareness. How do we actually know if we've been successful? So with this group of students, we had just covered data management, and the students were really interested in using Google Forms again. We had used them in class already, but they wanted to use Google Forms, and they wanted to create a survey to find out what people knew already. So this link that Susan has included, and thank you, Susan, goes into the Google Form survey that the students created. They created these questions as a whole class based on the information that they gathered after their first food bank visit. And then we sent this out to people both on Twitter and on Facebook, and some of our parents sent it out as well. And I'm just going to, I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but if you want to go and complete the survey just to see what the kids came up with, and then when you're done, you can actually click on a link to see previous results, so you can see what other people in this room, in the room, answered. And I did clear this survey, so all of the previous results are not in there. And when you're done, if you want to come back into this room and just click the check mark so that I know you're back in the room, that would be great. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the survey. Thanks for checking back in, Farron. So as you're still completing, I will let you know when the students had sent this out, we could actually see how many people had responded. So at this point, I can see how many responses we have on the survey, looking at the previous results. And as that number climbed, the excitement in the room really grew larger because they realized how many people were already engaged and interested about their topic. Sorry about that, Kate. Yes, Susan is right. So we have, I have my own Twitter feed, and I use that often with my class. So we sent out the survey on Twitter. We were deliberate about the people that we shared it with. So we actually tagged our local radio station, we tagged the newspaper, we tagged Ontario Food Banks, and then we also tagged several people that we know that live within the community. And I did not share it on Facebook as a class post, but some of our parents that followed us on Twitter would copy it and they put it into Facebook. You're welcome, Caitlin. And so we ended up having, I forget the exact number, but I know it was over 150 people had answered our survey. And as the rest of you are still completing it, I'll just talk a little bit about that. The students, because we had already used Google Forms and they were familiar with how the program worked, and they knew that if we sent it out on social media, we wouldn't necessarily be able to have the same people answer it. the second time. So they wanted to do the exact same survey before people watched their public service announcements and after people watched them. And so they decided that we should have a group of people that would answer it both times, but that would answer a different survey. So we made a survey, a private survey that had the exact same questions, and we sent it out to a target group. And those were the results that we analyzed when we looked at comparing, so that we knew whether or not we actually had an impact, so that it was the exact same group of people. In addition, what they did is when they looked at the results of the survey, and I'm going to move on to the second slide here just to show this. So looking at the responses here, and these responses were not from our sample group that we were comparing, but looking at these responses, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I saw Ruth joined us, and I was very happy about that, and then my mind went blank. I apologize about that. So they looked at the results of the first survey, and that's how they decided what their public service announcements or their persuasive video should be about. So if they asked a question and everybody knew the answer, then that was not information that they needed to include. So they were very deliberate, because they wanted to teach people and they wanted to raise awareness. The other interesting thing, and I only see 3 people checked back in here, so if you could just quickly check in to let me know that you completed the survey. I just don't want to go too far ahead without everybody here, so thank you. Oh, wonderful, okay. So when we were creating the questions, it was interesting because I was helping them type the questions out, but it really was the students that came up with the questions. And there was one in there about, would you be scared to go to the food bank? And as they were asking that question, the adult part of my brain was thinking, really, are we going to include that question? And I wasn't sure, and I even said to them, are you guys sure you want to include this one? Because there were lots of questions that we did pull out. And they were all like, yes, we want to ask that question. And looking back at that, I don't know why I questioned it, but that question and the answers to it, the way that most people responded, actually had a huge impact on where our project went. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But to me, that was a really great learning moment for myself about the importance of following student voice and being true to the fact that this is a student-led project. So yes, I am making sure that there are strong curriculum connections and that I am assessing and that the work that we're doing is meaningful, but it is their project, and allowing them to follow their own voice and include the pieces that they feel are important was really necessary. So that was a great moment for me. It's a great question. Why did they want to ask it? Caitlin, I asked them that question, and so I will say Susan has the link to the entire video, and she will share that in the resources. What I talked about earlier on in the video is that a lot of the students in my class are students that belong to families that access food bank services. So that's why this was a really authentic, meaningful project for the students. They wanted to help their own community. And it came about as we were talking and exploring through the project and conversations I had with the students that they wanted to ask that question because they were scared when they went there, because they felt intimidated, or because they knew their parents or family members or aunts, someone's grandma, had all mentioned their own feeling of either embarrassment or fear of having to go. And so that uncovered a whole layer of stigma that we really dug into as well in the classroom, and talking about the importance of trying to eliminate that stigma and what we could do also to make people feel more comfortable in that space. And I will talk about that actually in just a couple of slides here. So thinking about this, what curriculum connections can you make just thinking about data management? So I have the data management up here, the grade 3 curriculum expectations, and just thinking about what students are usually required to do, the surveys they typically ask. Looking at a Google Form survey of this nature, what types of things have we covered? And you can just add your ideas in the comment section again, and we'll just take a couple of minutes here. And as we're doing this, I will say on a personal level, and I feel like there's enough primary teachers in here that I'm not alone. I was at the point in my career where I never wanted to see another survey on what's your favorite color. I was so sick of kids asking that and seeing bar graphs that were created with that information. So I really wanted the kids or the students to start to look at more meaningful questions. So even outside of this project, when we were using Google Forms, we would do that to create meaningful survey questions that they could create action plans from. So even something like, what type of video game should I ask for Christmas, and then using their data results to make decisions. So just taking a look here at what is it that they need to do, and what have we covered through that activity, through the Google Form survey that you just looked at, and then looking at the results and interpreting that data. And also, as we're talking about this, I'll let you know that what the students did is they created, so they took their pre and their post data from our test group, and they compared it. So there are several questions there. I broke them up into groups. So there might be partners that were both looking at a question. They did not do that together, but that was just to ensure. Generally, I put a student that was stronger with one that was weaker, just so that when I was looking at the results, I could provide the opportunity for a conversation if there were any misconceptions that came up. So as the students looked at the pre and post data for their question, what they had to do is they had to create a graph to show how many people answered in survey 1 and how many people answered correct in survey 2, and then compare and see, were the results the same? Did more people answer correct the first time or the second time? And then based on that information as a whole group, we were able to talk about, did we have an impact or not? Did more people answer correctly the second time? And they loved that activity, and then we met as a whole group and we compared all of the results together, and we did find that, in fact, they had an impact after people had watched their videos. And just thinking about assessment in this as well, when we were looking at the initial survey together in order to determine what questions or what information rather to include on the videos, that was really assessment for learning. As they were working, I was checking in and seeing, did they understand what they were doing? Did they know how to read a graph? Did they know how to interpret data? And guiding them along and giving them those little mini lessons and tidbits that they needed along the way. When it came to comparing the pre and post data individually, that was something that I was able to assess as a summative assessment to see, did they actually have an understanding, and could they draw appropriate conclusions. So, so as you can see, though, there are so many curriculum expectations that are covered within an activity like this. So those were very intentional learning opportunities that I set up. Before I go into this video, and I'm going to have Susan post that in just a moment, I'm going to check in and say, do we have any questions? Give it a minute here. Looks like we are, oh, I'll just hang tight for a second here. I think somebody might have a question. Okay. So I'll keep my eye on the chat box in case anything comes. Oh, sorry, Ruth, how long did the whole process last? So this project actually, the initial part of it was about 6 weeks. However, it was one of these things that every time I thought it was over, they came up with another idea, and it ended up that our action plan grew larger and larger, and it actually carried us through the entire school year, which was fantastic. That being said, I could have very easily said, okay, that was fantastic, we're done after 6 weeks had I wanted to. So there was a lot of freedom for me, but because my students were so engaged and they were so excited, and it really seemed to gain more momentum as we went along, I allowed them that flexibility. So when we go into this bit.ly here, the next one, there is a video here, and it talks a little bit about how they use that survey data to move forward, and how I hadn't really anticipated that, but it turned the project into something that was much more rich. Yes, was a lot of learning time. However, because I had so much math and language and art and health and so many different subject areas were embedded into this, I could justify that. So for me, it was always about, can I justify the amount of classroom time, instructional time I'm spending on this project? And if I couldn't, then I wasn't going to continue forward. But it always worked out that I was able to. So I'll let you go ahead and watch that video. And again, when you're back, if you want to check in, the video is about 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so I think most of us are back here. I'm not sure because Amanda is away. So I hope I'm not moving ahead too quickly here. Ruth, it was great that they really did make a difference, and the impact that this had on this group of students was just beyond anything that I can convey. It was so phenomenal. But going back to that question in the survey, would you be scared to go to the food bank, and how I thought, oh, we should take that out, that really was the catalyst for what happened next, and for creating that artwork, and for having a lasting physical impact on a community organization that so many of their own families utilize. So that was so meaningful for the students. And we're actually going to flip right into one more video here. And I apologize for all the videos, but I really feel like the kids explained the project so much more eloquently than I ever could. In this next video, you can see the before and after of the space. And the video is only about a minute long, but there was a lot of unintentional math that came up. So thinking about how do we tie in the expectations? Well, for the next piece, when they looked at how they were going to lay out their paintings, they had to do a lot of measurement, and they learned a lot about the importance of being precise. And so we did this in the classroom on the floor before we even went out to the food bank to hang the pictures up. And it was just another really great learning opportunity that came up that I couldn't have planned, but was so rich and meaningful. So again, if you want to go watch this video, and I'll meet you back here in a minute, I'll clear this and you can check in when you're back. Caitlin, yes, it was so cool. And I have to tell you that I think I was as excited as the kids were every day to come into school. And there was always something fun and exciting going on that was connected to this project. So thinking about assessment, and I feel like I'm going to be going through this a little bit quicker than I would like, and I apologize. I'm just trying to be aware of the time and make sure that everybody gets out of here by 9 o'clock. So just thinking though, and this picture here, Bruce, I had, oh gosh, that's a good question, 22. I believe I had 22, it might have been 23 students in the class that year. So looking at assessment, I've taken this screenshot from the Growing Success document and just thinking about assessment and what that looks like and why we assess. And always remembering that it is for learning, as learning, and of learning. So that assessment cannot just happen at the end. It's not just a piece of artwork that's hanging on a wall. It's not just a public service announcement, but what are we doing all the way through? And how are we tracking that information? So as I already mentioned, I used two platforms. One was Google Drive, which at that point, this was 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a grade 2-3 class, so I actually managed the Google Doc piece on my own. In terms of data collection, in junior classroom a couple of years later, I had the students do that. I also had classroom seesaw with this grade 2-3 class, so the students were always constantly taking pictures, taking videos, uploading information, so that I had that digital log to go back to and to take a look at student conversations and student learning. And that was a really important piece for me in a project like this. So if you have any other ideas for ways that you can document learning, if you can throw that in the chat box, that would be great. I've only shared a couple of ideas. I know that there are more out there. Just always thinking though about how am I assessing and how am I going to record this information. And for me, it was a lot of anecdotal notes and a lot of pictures and a lot of videos. And then, as I mentioned earlier, flipping back to my curriculum document, taking a look at what the date was on that, and then referencing that when I was looking for that information. And also thinking about how we evaluate students. And traditionally there has been some people just use the unit test, but we know that that's not what Growing Success says we should be doing. We should be looking at the observations and the conversations and the student products. So looking at that triangulation of data, and that's why it's important to really record as much of that journey as you can. And as a side note, it's why I employed student photographers and videographers and secretaries in my classroom when I was assigning jobs. So just thinking about all of those sources of information and all of the opportunities to pull assessment data from those different opportunities and experiences that happen throughout the project. So when we are looking at this final video, it's really about following student voice. So this video here, we came back from the art installation and I really did think, okay, we're done. Like, this is it. And the students had some more ideas. So they will talk a little bit about that in this video. And I'm just going to take a quick peek at this question. Evaluating individual students. It is sometimes challenging, for sure, Ruth, to make sure everybody is engaged. My experience has been, and this is over 4 years of trying problem-based learning in a school demographic that is considered to be very high needs in terms of both behavior and special learning needs. My experience has always been that engaging students in these types of activities actually makes the learning more accessible and it lowers behaviors. So that's not to say that I haven't had issues that have arisen over time. Of course, we all do. But like every classroom teacher, will just have an alternate activity if there's a student that is not able to manage what we are working on that day, and just thinking about how I can re-engage them and meet them where they're at that way. So I'll let you go ahead and watch this video here. It's about 4 minutes, and again, if you can check in when you're back, that would be fantastic. I see lots of people back, so if you can just check in for sure to let me know you're back, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to keep chatting here. Yeah, Bruce, they did a fantastic job with this project, and the way it evolved was just, it blew my mind. I never would have anticipated this at all. And that's the great thing about problem-based learning, is that if you allow your students some freedom, they will really blow your mind with what they can accomplish. And as you could see in that last video, it allowed us to incorporate all kinds of science topics like soils and plants and structures into that project. So we really did, by the end of the year, have every subject area into the project. So we don't have a whole lot of time. We're literally going to spend about 5 minutes just taking a look here at this bit.ly that Susan's posted. Thanks, Susan. And when you go into this, thinking about the problem. So imagine the problem, what can we do to support monarch butterflies in our local environment? So thinking about the threat of extinction, what could you do? And in this doc, in the doc that she has posted the link to, you will see 3 science links. So we have K-8, grade 9 and 10, and grade 11 and 12. And within each of these curriculum expectations, there are, or grade level, sorry, there are specific expectations that could be linked to this one problem. So rather than looking at specifics, just thinking about what is the grade level and how could you tie it in? So are you looking at habitats? Are you looking at plants? Are you looking at the local ecosystem? And then thinking about what kind of an action plan could you create with your class to have them address this issue. So are you looking at public awareness? Are they planting some milkweed? Are they hosting a school assembly? What types of activities could they do? And then what cross-curricular links can you make through that action plan? So it starts with your curriculum, your specific curriculum expectations from one subject area, and your action plan is really where you're able to branch off and you're able to tie in your math and your language and your art, and then also thinking about assessment opportunities. So what are you going to look for? What are you going to assess? And again, I apologize. I always seem to think I have more time than I do. So I think we'll probably set a timer for just about 4 minutes here, if that's okay, Susan, if you don't mind. And then we will pop right back into the other room. And if you have any questions, just add a comment in the link or in the chat box, and I'll make sure I address that. I also want to mention that I will be checking back in with this Google Doc. So if you're looking at this and you're looking for some feedback or just a conversation around, hey, does this sound like I'm on the right track, or what else could I do, please feel free to go back and visit this doc, and I will do the same. And we can continue that conversation and look at ways that we can support each other as co-teachers in developing rich action plans and tying in that assessment. So I'm already seeing here for grade 4 there are lots of connections that we can make. And this is really a very condensed version of what would take you much longer as in the planning process, so thinking about what this will look like. But I wanted to give you a little bit of time to dig in and see what that process looks like. So thinking about the steps. And I know I mentioned this quite a bit in session 1, but when you're looking at the action plan, you may very well have 1 or 2 of those steps already in mind before you even introduce the idea of the problem to your students. They will not always come up with the issue on their own. Sometimes it's provocation or several provocations that you have put out for them. So anticipating that student thinking and setting up opportunities to tie in your own action plan is definitely reasonable. And it allows you to have a little bit more structure within the problem. So again, just in the interest of time, I will go back to that. I think our timer, I don't know if there was a timer that was set. I thought I saw one here and now I don't. Oh, she turned it off. Okay, thank you, Susan. So I'm going to bring you back to the main page just so that we can continue few. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. I was just chatting along with them, and maybe I shouldn't have started talking so soon. I apologize to the participants for doing that. If that was distracting in any way, I just wanted to make sure that I'm being aware of your own time, because I know it's getting close to 9 o'clock and we all have an early day tomorrow. But I will be going back to the doc, and I will be taking a look at that. So, and I'm doing that because I know for myself, every year when I'm doing a new problem-based learning, I rely on my community to bounce ideas off of and say, hey, what do you think about this, or how could I tie that in? So looking next at the next slide, this message has resonated with me throughout the years whenever I am engaged in problem-based learning. So thinking about the fact that your students are in the driver's seat, yes, you are following student voice, but you really are the one that directs where this goes. It is your classroom. You are the one that is responsible for delivering curriculum and for assessing. So ensuring that the work you're doing is purposeful and is connected to curriculum. And often for me, that would end up with a conversation where I would say to the kids, oh, hey, you know what? Pull up the curriculum and see if we can connect it. And so they often would. They knew where the bookmark was, and they would throw it up on the smartboard, and they would take a look, and they would see, can we go forward with this idea? Is it responsible, and is it meaningful? I have one last video clip for you, and I really wanted to share this one because I think that it speaks to the impact of problem-based learning on students. It's only 1 minute long, and when you're back, if you want to check in with the check mark, that would be fantastic. Okay, great. It looks like everybody is back. Just to wrap up, I'm just wondering, does anybody have any questions? I think we've covered a lot tonight. We've talked a lot about this session and part one as well. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask or comment on before we wrap up tonight? Thank you, Caitlin. It really was very powerful and very unexpected for me, to be quite honest. The first time I engaged in problem-based learning, I had no idea how far it would go and how deep it would go for the students. And every year that I have engaged in a new project, it just seems to grow even larger. And for me, I also will add that I really feel like the tasks that are embedded within a project are so rich and so meaningful, and they really support the conceptual understanding of expectations, like math concepts, in a way that maybe I otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Caitlin, are you able to track the impact of this project on your students in their subsequent years? Well, it's quite interesting. I think I'm very unusual in the sense that the students that you saw in the grade 2-3 class here tonight, I actually taught a great deal of them in the following year in grade 3-4, and then I had some as well in grade 5-6. So I taught some of these students for 3 years, and what I can say as a whole is the students that I have worked with are very empathetic, caring students. I'm not at the school this year, but I hear a great deal that there are several of them that are always looking for ways to help their community. And so for me, to raise good citizens is really, I mean, we're doing the world a lot of good if our students leave our classrooms and want to create a better world. Thank you so very much to everybody that joined me tonight. I know that it is a busy time of the year, and I really appreciate all of your time and your questions and your comments. I'm going to hang out for a little bit yet, so feel free to continue asking questions. I just didn't want anyone to sneak out without me saying thank you. Again, if you want to reach out with any questions, you're welcome to contact me through email or follow me at Twitter.
Thank you, Jennifer. I just skipped ahead to your resources page. I'm not going to post all of these in the chat because they will all be on the resource page. So you'll be able to access them there, which is probably a little bit easier than on the chat. However, I am posting right now some links in the chat to the feedback survey and the certificate link. And the resource link is not active yet. Well, I think it is active, but it doesn't have anything on it yet. I haven't published it, but I'm working on it, and the OTF calendar. And before I turn off the recording, Jennifer, I just want to say thank you for a really inspiring session. I think you really clarified in so many ways what the power of problem-based learning is. And I think the impact, you talk about following those students into the next year and on, and how you've raised citizens. I think the impact of projects like this is just so far-reaching for our students and our communities. So thank you so much for giving us a real snapshot into one project, which is really inspiring to all of us. So thank you so much, Jen, and thank you everyone for your participation tonight. You had all kinds of different things to do, and you were keen participants. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn off the recording, but as Jen said, she'll be hanging on, and I will put back her maybe her resources slide or one of her previous slides. So thank you everyone, and good night.